Before we move into our discussion of environmental economics, we need to just go over the main causes of environmental problems. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about humans' use of natural resources and increasing ecological footprints. So let's just kind of sum these things up into the main causes of environmental problems. The first main reason for environmental problems is human population growth. So here you can see human population has grown exponentially and is expected to continue to experience exponential growth for a while. There's some different things that could happen that we'll talk about. Here you can see current population, 7.5 billion people. Actually, it's more about 7.6 billion people. And there are projections that human population could reach 9.8 billion by the year 2050. And then here it says we don't know how many people the Earth can support indefinitely. So basically, we don't really know what Earth's carrying capacity is. So how many people can the Earth actually support with its resources? There are estimates anywhere from 9 to 12 billion I've seen. 12 billion people would be a very high estimate. So most people think that the Earth realistically could support about 9 to 10 billion people. Currently, there's about 3.5 billion acres of arable land. So this is land that would be suitable for growing crops. And basically, if everyone on Earth agreed to stop eating meat to become a vegetarian, leaving basically no land for livestock or cattle, really, we would have available 3.5 billion acres. This is 1.4 billion hectares, which is generally how we see land measured in your textbook and in articles and stuff. It's in hectares. But so if we had this 3.5 billion acres, it would support about 10 billion people. So 10 billion is really considered the upper limit for food production. So if we have this 3.5 billion acres, then we could produce enough food to support 10 billion people. So I'm sure you know what exponential growth is, but basically you can see that you start with a small population size, and you can kind of think about it in terms of doubling time. So if you have a small number and you double that, then it's not that big. So it starts off slow. We double fairly slowly, but as population grows, then that doubling time is faster and faster. And so you see this spike in population growth. You'll often hear people describe the shape of exponential growth as a J curve. So what you see is you have this characteristic, low or small slope, and then it gets higher and higher and higher. And then what you see here is the population growth start to level out or transition to an S curve. So here, this would be showing if Earth's carrying capacity is 8 billion, then it starts to level out at 8 billion. Or here would be 10 billion. Here would be up to 16 billion, which I've never heard anyone say that we could support 16 billion people. But this is considered logistic population growth, which we'll talk about in our next unit on population. But this would be where as human population approaches carrying capacity, it starts to level out. Another thing that you might see is as human population reaches carrying capacity, it sort of slows down, but let's say it was 10 billion here, it would start approaching this 10 billion, but instead of leveling off at 10 billion, it would actually go a little bit above it and then we would probably see a big population crash. So it's possible that instead of seeing this S curve and just having things level out and have Earth be able to support the amount of people that we have, that we could actually experience a large population crash. So that population basically is reset to a level that Earth can support. So the second reason for environmental problems is affluence is increasing worldwide. We've talked about this a little bit. Basically, people are having access to more and more resources as things like cars become more affordable, or cell phones, or whatever. People around the world are able to purchase more goods and services. So along with being able to obtain more goods, we would expect to see more environmental degradation, waste, and pollution. So just some numbers for you. The average American consumes about 30 times the amount of resources than an average Indian, and 100 times the amount consumed by the average person in our least developed countries. If everyone on the planet lived like Americans, and this is based on a 2012 analysis, so it's actually probably higher than this, we would need 5 planets. So again, remember, this 2012 analysis showed that worldwide, the average ecological footprint, or not the average, but if you average worldwide the number of people and how we're living, we need 1.5 planets. But if everyone lived just like Americans, we would need 5 planets. So that's pretty bad. There are some positive aspects to affluence, though. So affluence can lead to better education, which could actually result in more concern about environmental problems and lead to more development of greener technology and potentially less pollution. So it's not just a lose-lose situation. There are things that could be good with more affluence worldwide. Okay, our third reason for environmental problems is widespread poverty. Oh, let's go back, sorry. So poverty can be detrimental to the environment and, of course, to people's health. In the world, about 1 in 3 people, or 2.6 billion people, live on less than $3.10 a day. This is from a 2015 estimate. And 1 billion people live in extreme poverty. So this would be considered less than $1.90 a day. So this would be, this would mean lacking enough money to fulfill basic needs like obtaining food and clean water for drinking, shelter, access to health care and education as well. And so we talked about this the other day in class about if you are just struggling to obtain your basic needs or sustain your basic needs, then it's kind of hard to worry about living sustainably, right? So this is why poverty can lead to environmental degradation. And also, there's high population growth in our least developed countries where poverty is a real problem. So having this high population growth and adding all these bodies to an area can only exacerbate the problem. And we also talked about this of why is there high population growth in poor countries. It can be because of less access to like family planning services, but also it can be a choice that families are making to have more children, right? Because having more children can mean having more help for gathering things like water and firewood, and for working on the land, tending crops and livestock. And also it can mean that there's more children there to take care of parents as they age. Of course, environmental degradation can have severe health impacts on the poor. Things such as malnutrition and illness due to lack of sanitation and due to also lack of clean drinking water. About 1 in 9 people in the world get their drinking water from the same place that they are washing and cooking. And so a lot of the water is contaminated by both animal and human feces. So just kind of to sum it up, it's sort of a vicious cycle where poverty can lead to environmental degradation to begin with, and then the environmental degradation in turn can have these health impacts to those already living in poverty. So it's a very vicious cycle that is going on. Just skip this. Okay, so I mean, a lot of people think that one way to really tackle problems that we have in the environment is to reduce poverty. So ways to reduce poverty include reducing malnutrition and infectious diseases, providing universal primary school education for all children, and also for the estimated 800 million illiterate adults on the planet. Another way would be reducing population growth by elevating the social and economic status of women. So educate women, and this can help reduce poverty and provide access to family planning. And also a lot of people believe in making small, low-interest loans to poor people. Okay, let's go to the next slide. The fourth reason for environmental problems is the omission of harmful environmental and health costs in market prices, right? So that failure to include the external costs. And so if we don't include the costs of harmful effects to the environment, consumers really have no way of judging how harmful a product they're buying is for the environment. If we included external costs, it's estimated that a gallon of gas would cost $12. So if we took into account all of the environmental and health problems that gas causes, we would pay $12 for a gallon of gas. Another way to look at it is that when we buy $2 worth of gas, we're really paying $14, not at the pump, but in the hidden costs to the environment and to our health due to air pollution and other environmental degradation. Another way that goods and services are harmful to the environment, or through excluding the external costs, is that companies often receive tax breaks and subsidies, which actually just kind of encourages them to deplete natural capital. Okay, reason number 5 for environmental problems is that people are increasingly isolated from nature. About half of the world's people and 3 out of 4 people living in highly developed countries live in urban areas. So living in urban areas along with increased technology usage is isolating people from nature. There's actually something called nature deficit disorder. So people are really suffering by not being exposed to nature. And, isolation from nature can really lead to apathy about environmental problems. So if you're never experiencing a natural environment, then you're not really thinking about how your actions can harm an environment. And finally, the last reason, our 6th reason for environmental problems and why they persist, is that people have different views on the environment or environmental worldviews, and so they have different ideas about solutions to problems. Let's see. All right, so let's look here. There are 3 major environmental worldviews. The first is called planetary management worldview. In this, humans are considered to be the most important species, and It's believed that humans should then manage resources for their own benefit. This is also sort of in line with something called utilitarian conservationist, whereby a person believes that we should be actively managing natural resources, but not just because, we love Earth and want to take care of the resources, but because we're trying to obtain the maximum benefit for the maximum number of people. Okay, this second one is the stewardship worldview. In this worldview, a person believes that we actually do have an ethical responsibility to be caring and responsible managers of the environment, or stewards of the environment. And this really encourages environmentally beneficial forms of economic growth. So, it's not saying we just need to take care of nature. It's saying we can have economic growth, we can continue to support our economy, but we can do it in a way that is, in agreement with nature. Okay, and the last one is the environmental wisdom worldview. And this basically says that nature exists for all species, not just humans. And if we thrive, then all species thrive. So we should be taking care of nature because we're just a part of it. And we can't remove ourselves from it. We're just part of the circle. All right, and here, so just revisiting the idea of tragedy of the commons. So, of course, the core case study for this chapter was about the Atlantic cod. Oops, sorry, let's go back. So we could really generalize the story of the Atlantic cod to fisheries around the world. Of course, things got pretty extreme in that example. You can remember the video we watched with the huge fights between the fishermen and the policymakers. But it's probably not too hard to imagine that happening as we continue to deplete more and more of our resources and really push fisheries and other things to the brink of extinction. So here, it's saying increasing human population and affluence increases the demand for more fish, ultimately depleting the resources. And here, isolation from nature, and the most prevalent worldview being planetary management means that there's really little pressure being put on governments to develop regulations to prevent tragedy of the commons issues happening. One way that we could deal with problems of tragedy of the commons is to use a shared or open access renewable resource at a rate well below its estimated sustainable yield. All right, this is called cooperative allotment. All right, and then another approach would be to convert open access resources to private ownership, with the idea being that if you own something, you're more likely to protect your investment. Unfortunately, though, history has actually shown that this isn't very effective and oftentimes leads to further environmental degradation. And also, it's kind of not possible to have private ownership of things like the atmosphere and ocean fisheries and global life support systems. So really, this idea of cooperative allotment would be the best way to deal with something like degraded fisheries. All right, so that's it for this. We will continue to the end of this section, to the end of the chapter, talking about economics when we return to class on Tuesday. See you guys then. Have a great weekend.